It's 5 p.m. across India. I am Tanvi Taneja, live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. With me today from London is my colleague, Ollie Barrett. Hi, Ollie.
Good afternoon, Tanvi. It's 11:30 a.m. here in London, 12:30 p.m. across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, pressure grows on Israel over its military campaign in Gaza, floods in Australia and a cold snap in South Korea. First, the headlines.
UN Security Council to vote on Gaza ceasefire today. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd in Tel Aviv to announce a new marine protection force in the Red Sea. The European Union sets critical mineral goals it needs for its green transition. EU environment ministers to meet to regulate packaging waste, soil monitoring later today. Major flood warnings in northern Australia after heavy rain along the Great Barrier Reef. South Korean residents worry over unexpected temperature swings.
Just last week, I wore short-sleeved clothing, and because it was so warm, I either carried my coat or left it behind. But suddenly, within a day, it became extremely cold, and now I'm concerned about the earth.
And India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurates the world's largest meditation center at Varanasi, also flags off a second Vande Bharat Express train from Varanasi to New Delhi. Up first, news of the Israel-Hamas conflict. Israeli forces launched fresh attacks throughout the night targeting Hamas's hideouts. The Israeli government said that it takes extraordinary measures to avoid hitting civilians. The Israeli military also released the names of 4 more soldiers who had died in combat in Gaza, bringing the number of soldiers killed to 126. Meanwhile, the Kerem Shalom border crossing point between Israel and Gaza opened for the first time for humanitarian aid truck on Sunday. The crossing at the borders of Egypt, Israel and Gaza is one of the main transit points for goods in and out of Gaza. The border crossing point had been closed after the attacks by Hamas on 7th October. 2 Egyptian security sources have said that Israel and Hamas are both open to a renewed ceasefire and hostage release, although disagreements remain on how it would be implemented. Egypt and Qatar, which had previously negotiated a week-long ceasefire and hostage release, insisted on expediting aid through the Kerem Shalom crossing before any negotiations could begin. Now, there are also reports that the United Nations Security Council could vote as early as Monday on a draft resolution to establish an aid monitoring mechanism in Gaza. The draft resolution calls for facilitating the use of all land, sea and air routes leading to the entire Gaza Strip, including border crossings such as that of Kerem Shalom. The fate of the draft Security Council resolution hinges on the final negotiations among Israel, the United States and the UAE. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd is in Tel Aviv, where he held talks with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Talks were focused on trying to end the high-intensity conflict and its transition to a more limited, focused conflict. Austin has prominently supported Israel's right to defend itself, but he has also become increasingly vocal about the rise in civilian casualties. DD India's Trent Mari joins us from Tel Aviv on the story now. Trent, following the recent high-profile visit by Jake Sullivan, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd is in Tel Aviv. Tell us what is on agenda and what is the message he's bringing along?
Yeah, Tanvi, that's right. That shuttle diplomacy out of Washington here to Israel continues with another high-profile visit, as you say. Secretary Lloyd meeting with Israeli officials right now, both from the military and the senior echelons of the government. And there are two main areas that we're watching out for when the Secretary will speak to the press later this afternoon. The first is any update on, I suppose you could say, the trajectory of travel from the Israelis here. We know Washington is growing increasingly concerned about the way Israel is conducting this operation. They are after answers when it comes to a bit of a roadmap, some parameters, if you will, that the Israelis are using to make a decision of when they will move away from this sort of high-intensity clearance type operation to a more targeted one that focuses on high-value individuals from Hamas. Because, of course, while those huge aerial bombardments and combat operations take place within that limited space of the Gaza Strip, we know civilian deaths continue to mount, and that is increasingly a concern of Washington, but also, of course, the UN, the European Union and others. The second area that we're watching out for, and I think this is quite crucial, is the shipping lanes between the Red Sea. We know, of course, that area has come under increased attack by Yemen-based Houthi rebels. Some of the world's biggest shipping companies are saying they're restricting their ships in that region because of attacks. We've seen rocket attacks. We've even seen attempted boardings by pirates on boats. There are some reports the US could be on the verge of announcing that it's going to dispatch its own maritime security force there. We understand already a US carrier strike group, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, has moved from the coast of Israel down to that region to be in a position to potentially strike those Yemen-based rebels if indeed the administration of President Biden makes that call. So, look, many moving parts in this war, concern about it spiralling into other parts of the region. So plenty of questions today for Lloyd Austin as he wraps up those discussions with the Israelis.
All right. Thank you, Trent. Trent Mari reporting to us from Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, about 1,000 Israeli volunteers are helping Palestinian patients get medical aid at Israeli hospitals. Members of Israeli volunteer organization Road to Recovery, spearheaded by Yael Noy, are helping transport sick Palestinians from checkpoints in the West Bank to hospitals in Israel for medical treatment. On to Europe now. The European Union has huge plans for green transition, reforming its electricity market, and it has set critical mineral goals for the same today. My colleague Ollie Barrett is in London. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Ollie, EU looking at a clean technology that it wants to manufacture.
Yeah, indeed it is, Tanvi. That's absolutely right. As you say, the European Union has set targets to dig up, recycle and refine lithium, cobalt and other metals that it needs for its green transition. But these targets may be out of reach due to a lack of funding, high energy costs and local opposition. Ministers are meeting to discuss these plans today. The bloc will likely need to find ways to trim demand, find substitute materials and forge partnerships that break China's stronghold on mineral supplies. The materials are essential for vehicle batteries, wind turbine magnets and other clean tech products that the European Union wants to manufacture. The UK says it will introduce a carbon tax by 2027 for emission-intensive goods imported from countries with lower or no carbon price. The government says the carbon border levy will apply to carbon-intensive products such as aluminium, cement, iron and steel. The tax will reflect the carbon emitted in the production of the goods as well as the gap between the carbon price in the UK and that applied in the country of origin. More than 300 people have been evacuated in what authorities expect to be Australia's worst ever flooding. Military helicopters have been dispatched to help people stranded in areas cut off by the floods. Thousands of people are experiencing power outages in the northern part of Queensland. There's also been extensive flooding in Cairns as heavy rain cut off several tourist towns along the Great Barrier Reef. Weather officials forecast more rain in the next couple of days. In Argentina, at least 13 people have been killed after a severe storm struck a coastal region there. The authorities have warned residents that the storm, which had gusts of up to 93 miles an hour, making it comparable to a Category 1 hurricane, is expected to bring heavy rainfall and intense winds to the capital. Residents in the South Korean capital, Seoul, have seen an unexpected dip in temperatures. Temperatures in Seoul reached a low of minus 12.2 degrees. This just days after the city recorded 16.8 degrees Celsius on December the 8th, the second highest temperature since 1968.
Just last week, I wore short-sleeved clothing, and because it was so warm, I either carried my coat or left it behind. But suddenly, within a day, it became extremely cold, and now I'm concerned about the earth.
Iraqis have started voting in the first provincial council elections in more than a decade. Around 6,000 candidates are contesting 285 seats nationwide, according to the Independent High Electoral Commission. The vote takes place in 15 of 18 Iraqi provinces and is seen as a prelude to parliamentary elections in 2025. Egyptian officials haven't announced who won last week's election yet, but incumbent President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is widely expected to win a third term. The elections took place at a time when the Arab world's most populous nation is in the midst of an economic crisis and also experiencing the effects of the ongoing conflict between Hamas and Israel. El-Sisi is a former military general who's led Egypt for the past decade with an emphasis on security over democracy. Serbia's President Alexander Vučić has claimed victory in a snap parliamentary election, saying that his party is heading for an absolute majority. Pollsters say the populist SNS party led by Vučić won 46.2% of the votes, while the opposition centre-left Serbia Against Violence Alliance is set to come second with 23.2%. The centre-left alliance accuses the ruling party of election fraud and says it will complain to the Election Commission after the initial results. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine and the European Commission will soon assess Kyiv's progress on aligning its legislation with that of the European Union.
We have the decision of the European Council, for the sake of which we have worked throughout the year, a decision to open negotiations on membership. In the coming days, we will officially launch with the European Commission the process of assessing Ukrainian legislation for compliance with EU legislation, the screening process. We are also preparing for the work on the negotiation framework for Ukraine. We expect it in spring.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has dismissed remarks made by US President Joe Biden that Russia could attack a NATO country if it won the war against Ukraine.
I think President Biden understands that. This is simply a figure of speech used in an attempt to justify a mistaken policy on Russian access. Russia has no reason or interest to fight the NATO countries. There is no geopolitical, economic, political or military reason to go to war with NATO countries.
The long-awaited trial of Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai has begun amid a heavy police presence. The founder of the Apple Daily newspaper stands accused of conspiring to collude with foreign forces under national security legislation and taking part in a conspiracy to publish seditious materials under the city's colonial-era sedition law. Britain is calling for Hong Kong to release Jimmy Lai ahead of the trial on charges including the United States. He faces up to life in prison if convicted on national security charges, which rights activists have called baseless. DD India's Andrew Wood reports from Hong Kong.
the actions of Mr. Lai during his ownership of the newspaper is one part of the charges against him, namely that he committed sedition or conspired to commit sedition through the publication of the newspaper. Now, already in the first day of the trial, the defence have come back and said that actually there's a problem here, that the charges filed against Mr. Lai were filed a few days too late, beyond the deadline. So that has to be sorted out by the court. But of course, if Mr. Lai's lawyers are successful, then certainly a large chunk of the charges against him would be dropped. The other part of the charges against him relate to endangering national security. Now, a few years ago, Beijing imposed a national security law, a very strict national security law, on Hong Kong after the protests of 2019. And this basically snuffed out an awful lot of dissent very, very quickly. Under these charges, Mr. Lai is charged with collusion with foreign powers, in particular America. He's alleged to have gone to speak to American politicians and asked them to put sanctions, allegedly, on Hong Kong politicians and Hong Kong officials who've been involved in the crackdown on freedoms, democratic freedoms in Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, I'm Andrew Wood, reporting for DD India.
That's it from me here in London. Tanvi, back to you.
Thank you, Ollie. Ollie Barrett joining us from London. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on the show. South Korea, the United States and Japan condemn North Korea's second ballistic missile launch in less than 12 hours. And coming to the end of what has been a very turbulent year, Santa Claus makes the biggest wish at his Arctic Circle chamber for people all over the world to live together in peace. Bring you the news as it unfolds. We get to the heart of the matter.
We don't just present facts, we demystify complex social, political and economic events.
We break stories that shape the world's present and future, because you deserve the truth.
I am Tanvi Taneja from New Delhi.
I'm Ollie Barrett from London.
I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C.
Join us on DD India Global Monday to Friday at these times.
Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs, with a fusion of aesthetics and substance. Introducing news in a new avatar. Experience the world through a new lens. Stay tuned to DD India for an exciting journey beyond borders.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. More from Asia now. North Korea launched a second ballistic missile in less than 12 hours on Monday. The solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile has a potential to travel more than 15,000 kilometers. Pyongyang had condemned the United States for orchestrating what it called a preview of a nuclear war with the arrival of a nuclear-powered US submarine in South Korea on Sunday. DD India's Jagriti Dave reports from Washington, D.C.
These latest indications of a launch by North Korea are expected to complicate further the attempts by the United States to denuclearize the peninsula. It suggests that North Korea is willing to double down on its threats rather than view the actions by the United States, Japan and South Korea their cooperation as a deterrence. And this ramping up of its missile test by Kim Jong-un is an example of that. There's added concern that North Korea could also supply weapons to Russia as part of its war with Ukraine in exchange for Russia's knowledge about nuclear technology. So these missile launches are worrying not only for the Korean Peninsula, but wider geopolitics. Now, all this comes as the United States, Japan and South Korea are about to launch a sharing system of missile data of launches by North Korea, and that's due to happen this month. And the sorts of things that they will be sharing are detecting and tracking incoming North Korean missiles. There'll be nuclear operation scenarios as part of their joint exercises. All of these which Pyongyang views as provocations, but which the United States, Japan and South Korea view as necessary parts of their attempts to denuclearize the peninsula and for the security of the trilateral agreement and their own individual nations against the threats and the challenges posed by North Korea.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the U.S. condemns North Korea's missile tests as they are a violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. South Korea's National Security Council called the launch a destabilizing act that ignored international warnings and multiple UN Security Council resolutions.
Despite our military's repeated warnings, North Korea continues to carry out threatening provocations. Once again, I strongly warn that North Korea is entirely responsible for any consequences from all subsequent situations.
Japan condemned the missile launch, saying that it is capable of reaching anywhere in Japan as well as in the United States.
Based on calculations of its flight trajectory, the ICBM-class ballistic missile launched this time has a range of more than 15,000 kilometers, depending on the weight of the warhead. And in that case, it can reach anywhere in the United States. We have strongly condemned North Korea and have made a solemn protest against its actions through diplomatic channels in Beijing.
And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world. Pakistan's jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan used an artificial intelligence-generated audio clip to call for votes in a political event. The audio played over a photograph of the former president during an internet rally of Pakistan's political party drew more than 1.4 million views on social media. A former U.S. lawmaker, George Santos, has threatened to sue comedian and host Jimmy Kimmel and broadcasting company ABC with a cease and desist letter accusing them of using his cameo videos without his permission. Kimmel had been secretly ordering cameos and Santos and airing them on his show as part of a segment called Will Santos Say It? A Christmas-themed park in Croatia called Salahaland welcomed the festive season with 5 million lamps this year. Zlatko Salah, the owner of the theme park, launched the park in 2001 with 70,000 lamps. Now, sad news coming from Guinea. Around 8 people were killed and 84 injured after an oil terminal blasted in Guinea's capital, Conakry. The explosion at the West African nation's main oil terminal rocked the Kaloum administrative district in downtown Conakry, blowing out the windows of several nearby homes and forcing hundreds to flee. The origin of the fire remains unknown. And India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, on the second leg of his visit to the Indian city of Varanasi today, unveiled a plaque to mark the inauguration of a newly built temple called the Swarved Mahamandir. The temple is dedicated to Sadguru Sadapal Dev Ji Maharaj, who is the founder of Vihangam Yoga, an Indian school of yoga and meditation. The Prime Minister paid tribute to the statue of Maharishi Sadapal Dev and also took a tour of the temple complex. The building has 115 lotus petal domes and Swarved verses are carved on the inner walls of the temple. Spanning more than 300,000 square feet, the temple is the world's largest meditation center It is capable of hosting 20,000 meditation practitioners. Prime Minister Modi also participated in the Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra in Sevapuri, a rural area of his Varanasi constituency. He watched a sports event at the Kashi Sansad Khel Pratiyogita 2023. Later, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also interacted with beneficiaries of various government schemes during the event. And India's Prime Minister also laid the foundation stone and dedicated to the nation multiple development projects worth over $2 billion in the Indian city of Varanasi today. These projects include the inauguration of new Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay Nagar, new Bhopur dedicated freight corridor project, amongst various others. The Indian Prime Minister also flagged off Varanasi to New Delhi Vande Bharat Express train, Dohri Ghat Mau Memo train and a pair of long-haul goods train at the newly inaugurated dedicated freight corridor. Prime Minister Modi also addressed the public gathering there and asserted the importance of Uttar Pradesh's development for the prosperity of the nation.
जब काशी का विकास होता है तो यूपी का विकास होता है और जब यूपी का विकास होता है तो देश का विकास होता है। इसी भाव के साथ आज भी यहां करीब 20,000 करोड़ रुपए के विकास कार्यों का शिलान्यास और लोकार्पण हुआ है।
And talking of India's development journey, the Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra reached the districts of Udhampur in India's northern Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. The Yatra was welcomed with tremendous enthusiasm and active participation from the local communities. Beneficiaries shared progressive stories of the benefits they availed from various government schemes. Under Meri Kahani Meri Zubani program, the IEC vans at the center of the Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra have emerged as a dynamic tool as it continues to traverse the districts in Jammu and Kashmir. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar held talks with the visiting Foreign Minister of Benin. Shegun Adjadi Bakari is in capital New Delhi today. India is Benin's largest trade partner and a significant investor as well. The two sides are looking forward to scaling up their bilateral ties. And ahead of Christmas Day next week, Santa Claus delivered a Christmas message wishing for a peaceful New Year. Seated at his Arctic Circle chamber in his hometown of Rovaniemi in Finland, Santa Claus expressed his wish for people all over the world to live together in peace. Santa also read letters received from across the world.
Oh, this is a story in a book.
That's all in this edition of DD India Global. We'll be back with another edition of the show at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. For now, we wish for peace everywhere in the world. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Tanvi Taneja. From my entire team in New Delhi, thank you for watching. Namaskar.